Hi, this is Matt from Skybow. You're having hard times deploying your solutions to SharePoint? Then let me introduce you our latest Solution Studio feature, the Selective Deployment. It was the reason why we were developing a specific deployment. And there are a couple of challenges that you have or might have if you create a solution and you want to deploy that from test to production, or if you have different customers and you want to deploy it to the customer sites. So maybe so far we had just one package. It created one package which includes everything that you've built. And maybe you don't want to deploy everything which is in the package. You have some options to say, yes, I want to include the content or not. I want to include the permissions or not. But the whole rest, it's all just in there and it will be deployed and updated. So no way of just deploying some specific parts. That's really the main challenge that we're facing. And another thing is you're probably working on a change. You develop something new in a solution, and then your users realize something which is not working correctly, and you need to deliver a fix. So how can you deliver a fix without rolling out the whole rest you're working on? That's another challenge. And with our new feature, we can overcome that as well. So another thing is, if you are not the only person who is working on your solution, maybe you have some coworkers doing other changes, probably not on the same list. That will not work for sure. But if you have maybe really two different dossiers or two different lists you're working on, and you just want to deliver one change, your own change probably, and not the one from your colleague, that's also not going to work with the standard deployment or the full deployment that we had before. Another one is if your users are doing changes on the production side, so on the live side, after the deployment, maybe users are changing the column names, they are changing views, they are adding other columns, they are changing the star page, maybe rearrange some lists, etc. They're changing permissions or the navigation links, and you have that as a part of your solution. If you have, of course, if you have additional views, then that's not a problem. But if you have views which are included in the package, by default, with the standard deployment, it just gets overwritten and all the changes are lost. So, and that's a use case which happens a lot, especially to pages as well, star page, additional pages. Yeah, you can restrict people for sure to not allow them to do these changes by removing the permissions. But yeah, in certain scenarios, yeah, you cannot remove those permissions, so they will have them. And yeah, it's hard to control that, or to tell them they are not allowed to do that, otherwise it will be overwritten and so on. So yeah, and in some use cases you really want to have it like this, so you want the users to be able to do those changes, but you don't want to overwrite them if you do an update in your deployment. Another thing is, if you work with our document generator feature, there, if you just use the standard upload a document or template way, and then this template is always packaged. It's just part of the package, and it will be overwritten. But if you want the customer or the users to change those templates, maybe you have one solution you want to deliver for different companies or different departments, and they want to have a different, maybe just different header image or a different title. They can change the template for sure, but it gets overwritten the next time you're gonna make an update. That's another challenge that we had. And last but not least, another thing is you just want to deploy data, meaning items, content, items of lists or documents and folders, etc., in the very first deployment, but afterwards you don't want to have it. So there are different ways to do that with the standard deployment, just having one package 1.0, which includes the content, and afterwards you don't include the content. But this way you always have to install version 1 first and then do an update and so on. But there's no way to say, just give me version 3, but I want to have it first time with content and in the future without the content. So these are the main challenges that we had to work on this feature, and that's why we have now developed this pretty new. It's like, what is it? Maybe 1 month ago we've released this new feature, and it's during the direct site deployment. We have this new option from standard deployment and selective deployment. All right. So if we look at our features, what can we do? If you use a selective deployment, so standard deployment will stay as it is as today. It just deploys the site. It's still incremental, so it will not always do a full deploy unless you do a force update, but otherwise it's also incremental, but you cannot unselect certain things. And with the new selective deployment feature, you will get this dialog here, what we see on the right. And we show you everything what is in the package, and you can then unselect certain parts, a list, a view, a field. It really goes down on to the column level, permissions, pages, navigation links, etc. I can show you afterwards. It's quite detailed, and you can uncheck or check those. That's one thing. Sometimes, like before in this screen here, sometimes you will have some conflicts. And with the standard deployment, you just have the option to say, if you have just one conflict, you have to force update everything unless otherwise you cannot make the deployment. But now with the selective deployment, you can have probably 1 or 2 conflicts, but then you can force override only this certain conflict and the rest will not be overwritten. I can show you that as well afterwards. Or you simply deselect this part which has a conflict, and then it's not a conflict anymore because it will not be deployed. So the whole rest will be deployed as is, and the conflict you can resolve each conflict separately. The one option is, which is very important as well, is if you unselect something, by unselecting, it's just for that specific deployment. But probably you want to say, it's not just for that deployment. I want to also exclude that from all the future deployments until you say include it again. But maybe you, like for the scenario, you're building something, but you don't want to deliver it. Then you can exclude it. And it will be excluded from that deployment, but also from all the future deployments. And you would see who excluded it. So if I'm excluding it, then, for example, my colleague Christoph, he's also working on that solution. He's doing a selective deployment, and he will see that I excluded a certain part. And then he can ask me, or yeah, it's just safe that he's not then will deploy my changes that I don't want to deploy yet. So you can exclude them in the future. Then that's very specific to column names. On each list, you can say we should prevent overwriting the display names. That's a quite specific scenario, but if you have a solution, you deploy that to different departments or customers, like I said, and maybe one customer is is calling a field, I don't know, just status, and another one calls it request status, or want to rename a column, just the display name, that it's just works for his purpose, or for their users, for them to understand what it really is, then they can rename those columns. But with the standard deployment, all those columns, they are always overwritten again and again. But with this feature, we can prevent overwriting the display names. So, and that's per list. Once you've done everything, or you did your changes, exclude stuff, resolve your conflicts, you have to verify your selections, or your selections once again, and to check if it's still gonna work like this, or it's still something which is still conflicting and maybe not resolved yet. And last but not least, that's for both options, for the standard and the selective deployment. You will see an overview of everything what's getting deployed. So like a tree view. And yeah, that's what I'm going to show you in a demo. All right. Like always, I'm using our probably well-known expense demo site. In my site, I do have some versions. As you can see, I already have 7 different packages, and I also have different deployments. So I have 3 deployments on different sites, even one more, a very old one on another tenant. And the first thing is here, production site is still in an older version. And it doesn't matter if I do a new deployment or if I do an update deployment, it's always the same. We anyway have to check. So this one is, let me check. It's from April 22. It's quite old. So I'm choosing the latest version here, like always, clicking on update. That's still the same. I start the verification, which takes, it depends. If you do a new deployment, it's much faster than if you have an existing deployment. It takes a little bit longer because it really has to compare what you've deployed before. But in this case, it shouldn't take too long. And I will try to talk over it a little bit. It will really show me all the differences between the package that I just created this morning, for example. 1.7 was created this morning, and now we already can see for the full, it's still called full deployment. We will rename that to standard deployment in the next update. There are some stuff which is, I've added a cross-site collection lookup, for example. We have some columns which are changed, and the only way for now with the previous option was to say, I cannot click next, as you can see. I would have to say force update, and then everything is forced. Even the things that are not changed, it will be completely force overwritten. For sure, we will not delete anything. It's just like it was before. We would just re-add everything, and we will change everything to that version. If I switch over to selective deployment, and it's really an advanced mode. You have to know a little bit what you're going to do. We will see that additional dialog. In this dialog, we can already see the same conflicts that we just had here. These conflicts, of course, they're here as well. And you see them here in red. So one is here. And if you hover over the icon here, the red one, we see what's going on. So here the logo has been changed. I guess I removed it, for example. So 2 ways to overcome that conflict. For sure, I could say, I don't care. I deselect it, and it's resolved. So you see it's skipped this way, but it's just skipped for that one deployment I'm doing right now. So that's one way I could resolve that conflict only. Another way is right click or here on the three dots, doesn't matter. We have three options here. One is to force it like this. Now it's resolved because I'm forcing it. So this little check mark is forced. So then only this part will be forced. The rest is as is. That's one option. Or I can say exclude it from that deployment or from all deployments, not just from that one, but also from the ones in the future. That will look like this. So it's deselect. I cannot select it anymore. It's disabled. And here we would see who excluded it. It will always show the email address of the person who is logged in. So this way I know who to contact if I'm not sure. So if someone else would go in here for the next deployment, we would see, oh, that was the excluded by Matthias. Maybe I can ask him why and what's the reason, or it's just okay as it is. So, and of course, we can include it again later on, or we can just reset. So let's say I disable it, I can say reset, and it's in the original status again. So those are the three options we have everywhere. We can also say I don't want to deploy the site header even if there's no conflict, or I exclude it. So that's how it works. And as you can see, we have that here for all the settings, for the site navigation. So we can each navigation point, even here, I have 4. As you can see here, there's also a link which is being deleted, for example. So I had that link in the navigation in version 1.4, but in 1.7, it's not there anymore. And if I don't want it to get deleted, so I just unselect it for now or for the future. And same is for pages. We can see, oh, start page has been changed. Same here, I could just force update it. I can force that one. And then in lists and libraries, we see all the lists. Every list seems to have a change, but probably not everything has changed. We will just do the stuff which has changed. If I want to force override something like all the forms, then I can simply select the forms. Then they are overwritten. I wouldn't have to do that, but because they are the same. But for some cases, maybe you want to force it if something is not working well. Here we have another conflict. We see we have a conflict in fields, and we also have a conflict in the views. There's one view which is changed, and there's one column which has been changed. We've deleted a column. That's what we can see here. And permissions is the last one that we have here, and side fields and side column types. One thing to mention here on the top is we can like just force everything. Then it's like a full update. Or we can reset it to the initial status. Those are the two things that is for everything, for the whole tree. And we have some filters which should make it much easier to find certain things, especially if you have errors. So if you have errors, you can simply say, show me errors and conflicts only, and we see everything that is an error. Now I can decide, okay, I don't want to do the site logo, maybe I exclude it. I will force this one, force that one, and force the last one here, right? This is already resolved. Here it's a cross-site collection lookup. I have to provide another URL, which will work. And then I can go back and say clear. So I would see everything again. On the lists, that's something we missed, is here we don't see it, but on the fields, so we see all the columns here for the fields. On the fields, we have an additional option. Per list, for all the fields, it's not for one specific field, it's really for it's for all fields only. We can say do not overwrite display names. So for that specific list, we do not overwrite it. And that's also something we can then filter out. So which lists have columns which are not overwritten. And last but not least, we can see what's excluded. So it would filter everything what is excluded. Those are the three main filters. Of course, you can always search for stuff like, I don't know, status. You would find everything which has status in it, and yeah, or permissions, or I don't know. Document generator templates, those are the ones which are uploaded manually in the document generator feature. Those are down here. As well here, you can unselect or exclude. So you could deploy it maybe the first time, and then in all the future updates, you would exclude them because then they are managed directly in the site as an example. And then once you're finished, you still see this error here on the top, but all the rest is resolved. If I click yes or OK, you have to verify it again. You can also press here first, but if you didn't press here, it will ask you, hey, you need to verify. Yes, start. And now it would verify again with your selections. So it would verify if the thing you've selected, like force or unselected, do not deploy, if it will work like this. And if everything is okay, we would see that. We can make an additional change if needed, or just go ahead and go to the final step, which will be a summary. So here you see the summary already. It's all good. That's how it will be done. Some stuff is deleted. Navigation link is removed. And I could start the deployment. I will not do that for now because it would take like 2 to 3 minutes to do that, but just that's the last step, the summary, which will show you really what will be deployed. Another thing I would like to show you is another scenario that's up here. In that scenario, I already have a deployment, and I made the previous deployment I did was already a selective deployment, not a full one. If I'm now going, so this one was a selective deployment before, and I already excluded some parts. If I now start the verification here, then two things to show here. One thing is, once you've done a selective deployment, it will always select selective deployment as default. So it's not like standard deployment that is selected by default. It will be selective deployment. And if you switch, or if you want to switch back to full deployment or standard deployment, then it would ask you if you really want to do it, because there are some selections. As you can see, it's selective deployment. If I now would say I want to do a full, it will say, hey, there are some configurations in the selective deployment which will be lost, because yeah, you probably excluded some things, etc., and that will be lost, and then it would deploy everything again. So I don't want to do that. That's just like some kind of mechanism to check that it's really not overriding stuff which shouldn't. So it should be here. I can open it up again, and here we would see from version 1.6 to version 1.7, we still have a couple of changes, but show excluded only, we see that I've excluded 3 lists, 1 page, and the DocGen templates. And for all of them, we see it was me. So that was from the deployment 1.6. I hope I was able to show you how you can streamline your SharePoint deployments in less time and much more flexible.